Hello everybody, it's me, Alfie Chat, back for another video, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the history of Angry Birds. The Angry Birds franchise has over 20 games, 2 movies, and even theme parks, and yes, I'm not joking, Angry Birds theme parks actually exist. Whilst the Angry Birds franchise is still extremely popular to this day, and has been making Rovio, or should I say Sega, lots of money in recent years, the Angry Birds franchise has kind of gone downhill, so join me as I take a look at a very long look into the history of Angry Birds. The Angry Birds was originally started development in 2009. Angry Birds was made by a guy called Jacko Lislow. Jacko Lislow showed a concept to Rovio in 2009, showing a bunch of angry looking birds with no wings or feet knocking down buildings. Rovio thought this concept looked really strange, however they were, well, pretty inspired to say the least to base this game off of a similar game called Crush the Castle around this time. So after many development stages and well, you know, concept art, Angry Birds was released. Angry Birds had green pigs as enemies because in 2009 a swine flu epidemic was happening, so they were inspired to make the pigs green. Angry Birds originally didn't get that many downloads at first. However, the game got immediate success in 2010 when people started downloading the game left, right and centre, mainly due to the game becoming a featured app in the UK App Store charts, and Angry Birds quickly became a success. Angry Birds was a game about slingshotting birds out of slingshots to pop the pigs that had stolen their eggs. Angry Birds originally had about 6 or 7 characters: Red, Chuck, Bomb, Matilda, the Blues, Terrence and Hal. Other birds were eventually added, however they were added in later updates. Angry Birds became so successful that Rovio decided to put more Angry Birds games into production. The first sequel to Angry Birds was not Angry Birds 2, more on that later, but it was actually Angry Birds Seasons. Angry Birds Seasons was just like the first Angry Birds game, however it featured new locations, mainly based off of different holidays of the year, such as Christmas, Halloween, Easter, you get the point. In fact, Angry Birds started to grow so much beyond Angry Birds Seasons that Rovio started to put collaborations with other media into production. For example, in 2011, Angry Birds, or should I say Rovio, signed a contract to make a collaboration with Rio, that movie made by Blue Sky. The game was called Angry Birds Rio, and it featured the birds going to Rio in South America in order to free these birds with trapped in cages, which basically replaced the pigs. And you also had to defeat monkeys on certain levels. The game also had boss fights as well, which I really enjoyed, and I consider this game to be one of my personal favourites. Angry Birds Rio was a very great game to say the least, and it was just as successful as the other Angry Birds games. In 2012, Rovio launched a game called Angry Birds Friends. Angry Birds Friends was basically the original Angry Birds, except you could play online with Facebook friends. However, Angry Birds didn't stop there. There was more games being put into production after that, such as Angry Birds Space, which was released in 2012. Angry Birds Space featured the birds and pigs going into space, and it featured new gravity levels, and even had sci-fi redesigns for the Angry Birds characters. Angry Birds Space was a very successful game, and later in 2012, Rovio would announce that they would be partnering with Activision to make an Angry Birds game for consoles. The game was called Angry Birds Trilogy and featured 3 Angry Birds games: Angry Birds Classic, Angry Birds Seasons, and Angry Birds Rio. The games were ported onto consoles such as the Xbox, Wii, Wii U, 3DS, and the PlayStation Vita as well. Rovio also released PC ports of some of the Angry Birds games in late 2012. However, in 2013, The popularity of the Angry Birds franchise began to drop, mainly due to newer games taking the top charts, causing Angry Birds to become less popular. Rovio saw this as a threat and decided to put more Angry Birds games into productions, except these Angry Birds games had different formulas, one of them being Angry Birds Epic, which is a fan favourite. Angry Birds Epic received mixed reviews from critics, which gave Rovio some hope in the franchise. An Angry Birds racing game also released as well, called Angry Birds Go, where you had to race against different birds in karts. Other Angry Birds games with different formulas started to pop up here and there as well, such as Angry Birds Pop. In 2014, Rovio even launched a game called Angry Birds Stella, which was based off of Stella, another Angry Birds character in the game, and even featured some new birds. In 2015, however, Rovio said they would be returning to the classic Angry Birds formula with Angry Birds 2. Angry Birds 2, to despite the name, and to despite, well, there being many games before it, Angry Birds 2 was an official sequel to Angry Birds Classic. Angry Birds 2 had a completely different art style from Angry Birds Classic, and it also featured a new character as well called Silver, who had a new loop ability. The game also had a never-ending story mode, with new levels being added every so often, so the game would basically go on infinitely. Angry Birds 2 was no way near as successful as the original Angry Birds, however it was still very successful and it still has an active player base. Rovio in late 2015 announced that they would be partnering with Sony to make an Angry Birds movie. The Angry Birds movie, which was released in May 2016, was a movie featuring redesigned versions of the birds. The redesigns of the Angry Birds classic characters were quite controversial among the Angry Birds community, to say the least. However, most Angry Birds fans didn't mind them and ended up accepting them. The movie was about Red, Chuck, Bomb and the other birds teaming up to rescue the eggs from Leonard, also known as King Pig, and his pig army. The movie did horribly with critics, many critics not liking it. However, it did amazing at the box office, earning £352 million, or dollars as you call it in America, giving Rovio some hope in the franchise. The movie ended up reviving the franchise for a whole new generation. Shortly after, in 2017, Rovio announced that they would be making an Angry Birds game called Angry Birds Football, which was later shut down, and Angry Birds Football was a collab between Rovio and Everton in order to sponsor them for their football match. Angry Birds then started to make more Angry Birds games with different formulas, like I said a minute ago, these ones being Angry Birds Dream Blast, Angry Birds Blast and Angry Birds Evolution. Rovio started to mainly make games with the movie designs instead of the classic designs. However, in 2018, Rovio started to see the success that King had with their Candy Crush games, and they started to mainly rip off some of King's games. For example, the Angry Birds Pop series of games. Rovio mostly targeted the tile matching format, which is what they did for like the rest of 2018 and 2020. You see, in 2018, fans of Angry Birds were beginning to realise that Rovio was starting to milk the Angry Birds franchise. If you don't know what milking a franchise means, it basically means that a franchise doesn't make quality media anymore and just completely focuses on earning money without making none or very little quality. In 2019, Rovio announced something. They announced that they would be making VR and AR games for Angry Birds. These games would be called Angry Birds AR and VR Isle of Pigs. These games were not really as successful as Angry Birds 2 and 1, but it's shown that Rovio could revamp the franchise using new mechanics, and it showed that they still cared about the classic Angry Birds formula. Shortly after, in mid-2019, Rovio released a sequel to the Angry Birds movie called The Angry Birds Movie 2, which was made to go alongside the 10th anniversary of Angry Birds. I've only seen the movie a couple of times because I don't really like it. However, from what I remember, it's about Red, Chuck and Bomb going to this mysterious island where mysterious activities are occurring. There's new characters in it as well, such as Silver from Angry Birds 2, and this purple eagle called Zeta, who is apparently supposed to be Mighty Eagle's wife. The movie didn't do quite as well at the box office. It earned about $200 million at the box office, so it made about half of what the original movie made. However, after the movie came out, the 10th anniversary of Angry Birds was on the horizon, and it seemed as if Angry Birds could revive itself with this 10th anniversary. But sadly, that was not the case, because in summer 2019, Rovio did the worst thing they ever done. In summer 2019, Rovio, without any announcements, removed all of the original Angry Birds games off of the App Store and Google Play. Like, I'm not even joking, Angry Birds Classic, Angry Birds Seasons, Rio, Star Wars 1 and 2, Space, Go, and Epic were all removed from the App Store without, any announcements from Rovio. And now, obviously, this made a lot of their fans angry, and as fans started to demand an answer from Rovio. Rovio didn't give an official answer, however they did say on their YouTube channel that they removed the games because they wanted to test something. It's unknown what the test was, however some people have theorized that the test was to see whether more people would download Angry Birds 2 and the other newer games, proving that the only thing Rovio cared about was money and not the past. This was very controversial in the Angry Birds community, to say the least, and fans to this day still haven't forgiven Rovio, and they even made their own campaign called Bring Back 2012, which started in late 2019. Whilst this could possibly show that Rovio did this to get back at their fans for pestering them, I highly doubt this. Okay, so here we are in the present day. I'm currently recording this in May 2023 as of the time I'm recording this, and Angry Birds has had a lot of soft-launched Angry Birds games such as Angry Birds Racing, Angry Birds Kingdom, Angry Birds Legends, and we've even got a sequel to Bad Piggies, which was a game based off of the pigs, not the birds, where you had to build vehicles to get destinations. The 10th anniversary was a nice throwback to the history of Angry Birds, and it even started a new hashtag Bring Back 2012 campaign. And that's basically it. That's basically all of the history of Angry Birds summed up. Now, with that in mind, you're probably wondering, what does the future hold for the Angry Birds franchise? Well, considering that what we've seen right now, Sega, the company that made the Sonic franchise, is going to be buying Rovio eventually, so it seems as if they're going to be doing something with the games. So it seems as if Angry Birds has quite an interesting future ahead of itself. And that's basically it. Of course I couldn't cover everything in this video, because this video would be like an hour long, but I covered as much as I could. Thank you so much for watching this incredibly long look at a game that I've kind of grown out of a little bit. Please share this video on Twitter and Reddit. I'll be active there most hours of the day. Big shout out to Guest666, one of my friends who has been supporting me for a very long time, and shout out to Tiffany Fisher Artist as well, who has also been a friend of mine on Twitter for a while now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in whatever I make next. Goodbye everybody.